Good morning and welcome to Mountain View. I want you all to know that we've been praying over this service. We've been praying that you would just have an amazing encounter with the Lord this morning and an awesome time of fellowship with other Christians. I want to invite you to stand and join us. We're going to praise the Lord. Here we go. You are here, moving in our midst. We worship you. We worship you. You are here, working in this place. We worship you. We worship you. You are here, moving in our midst. We worship you. We worship you. You are We've seen what you can do, oh God of wonders. Your power has no end. The things you've done before, in greater measure, you will do again. 'Cause there's no prison wall you can't break through, no mountain you can't move, all things are possible. There's no broken body you can raise, no soul that you can't save, all things are possible. The darkest night, you can light it up. You can light it up. Oh God of revival, let hope arise. Death is overcome. You've already won. Oh God of revival. You rose in victory, and now you're seated forever on the throne. So why should my heart feel what you've defeated? I will trust in you alone. There's no prison wall you can't break through, no mountain you can't move, all things are possible. There's no broken body you can't raise, no soul that you can't save, all things are possible. The darkest night, you can light it up. You can light it up. Oh God of revival, let hope arise. Death is overcome. You've already won. Oh God of revival, the darkest night, you can light it up. You can light it up. Oh God of revival, let hope arise. Death is overcome. You've already won. Oh God of revival, God of revival. So come awaken your people, come awaken your city. Oh God of revival, pour it out, pour it out. Every stronghold will crumble. I hear the chains hit the ground. Oh God of revival, pour it out, pour it out. Come awaken your people, come awaken your city. Oh God of revival, pour it out, pour it out. Every stronghold will crumble. I hear the chains hit the ground.
never fails me. All my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire. In darkest night, you are close like no other. I've known you as a father. I've known you as a friend. I will sing of the goodness of God. Sing all my life. And all my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I surrender now, I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. My life laid down, I surrender now, I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. Every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. Oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. Sing all my life. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of
Yes, happy Sunday, church fam. How we doing? Hope you had a good 4th of July. Everybody still got all their fingers and toes? You good? We had a good time on the 3rd, right? Last Sunday after church, little hot dog bar. Actually, I should say little. That thing spiraled out of control thanks to Derek McDonald and some other guys who decided we needed a buffet of options. Some of you even had a hot dog underneath there somewhere. That was a good time. And then, I hope you had a good 4th. Man, so I live over here in the burbs. That's what I call it, Heiberger Meadow over here. And I'm pretty sure our neighborhood thought that we needed to compete with the entire town of Staten's fireworks show. It was like, I thought the alien invasion had happened. I thought it was time. And so we actually had to grab our dogs and our kids and like literally leave the neighborhood and go watch somewhere else. But it was a lot of fun. It was wild. If we haven't met, by the way, my name is Mike. I'm the lead pastor here, privileged to serve this church. So as you watch it online, we're glad that you're tuning in with us. I think we got a great Sunday ahead of us here, so I'm glad that you're here. The video we just watched, for some of us, might have been like, wait, what is that all about? So the Awaken Network is a church planting network that our church financially contributes to. And it helps start new churches all over the country. So as you saw in that video, we've launched 6 churches in the last year and a half or so. And then we've got another 6 in the pipeline that are going to be starting this coming year. And the reason we do that is statistically, we just know that starting new churches is the best way to reach people that are far from God. Studies have proven that for a long time now. And so we help start new churches to reach people. And I'm a part of the advisory council of the Awaken Network now, which is kind of fun. And so I get kind of a front row seat to hearing how God is moving and what he's doing in these different places. So for instance, last week when we were at district conference, I actually met with Pastor Leo. And Leo was the guy you might have saw in the video. He has started a Filipino church, get this, in Williston, North Dakota. Have you been to Williston, North Dakota? If you are from the Philippines, that is a culture shock. Come like November through February, it's a shock of a different kind, right? Like completely different weather than what you've got in the Philippines. So people come there. There's actually a growing number of immigrants moving to Williston because of the shale oil boom over the last few years. And there's all kinds of work that needs to be done and jobs that are open and stuff. So lots of people from the Philippines are moving there and are getting involved in education and medicine and all these things. So Pastor Leo's church is to welcome all of those immigrants that are moving there, help them get on their feet and just like feel at home in Williston, but then connect them not only to a community that they can belong to, but connecting them to Jesus. And they're seeing lots of people make professions of faith and new baptisms. It's just really cool, like a Filipino church in Williston, North Dakota. Who would have thought, right? But you're a part of that, right? Part of why I wanted to bring this up is if you give to Mountain View, I wanted you to see, yes, there are needs and things that we do in our own area, and there are bills to be paid as a church and all these things. But, man, we're always looking for ways, okay, how can we get outside of this place? What is the kingdom of God doing? Not what is my denomination even doing or what is Mountain View doing, but, like, where is God moving and how can we partner with him? And the Awaken Network is one of the ways we've chosen to do that. So if you give to Mountain View, you give to that. You just don't know it. So surprise, you're a part of the Awaken Network. Good job. So thank you for your generosity. If you're not already giving, I just want to invite you to take that step, right? Trust God with your resources. He's the giver of them anyway. He's provided everything you have. Everything you have, he actually owns, and it's your job to steward that well for his glory. And so if you want to jump in on that, you can give online. There's baskets in the back on your way out. Lots of ways to jump in on that. Speaking of joining the team, you may have read in the bulletin, either this week or last week, that one of our key team members has decided to make a change in their life. So after 12 years of serving the youngest members of our church, Lisa Legner has decided it's time for her to step down as nursery director at Mountain View. I don't know if I need to tell you this, but 12 years to like have that role in a church that's volunteer, by the way, for 12 years is an incredible gift. That is so rare. And I don't even really know how to express my gratitude to Lisa and her husband, Jesse, and their kid. I mean, they've all involved in the time and energy and sacrifice of this thing. I don't even know how to express my thanks to them. So I'm going to need your help. This is my cry for help, okay? If you have a card you want to write, if there's a letter, something specific of how they've touched your family or your child or whatever, you can write that letter or card. There's a basket at the connection point you can drop that off there. But on July 24th, so 2 weeks from today, we're going to have a more public honoring of Lisa and celebrate some of the specific things that she's done in our church over those years. So you have 2 weeks to get a card or a letter, whatever you want to show your appreciation, and drop that off. Can we do that together? Can we give her a hand right now, even for all that she's done? And not too much. Save some. You got 2 weeks to bring it, okay? 2 weeks. The last thing I'll just mention is VBS, Vacation Bible School. This is full-on VBS season for our church. So a bunch of you registered your kids this week. Way to go. Like, we were pretty shocked, actually, at how many people have already signed up, so that's great. We still have some room. At this pace, we are predicting we might actually have to cap registration in order to make sure we also have room for people who will just kind of walk up that night and didn't know that they needed to register. We want to make sure we have room for them as well. So if you haven't already registered, do that today. Even during this message, I will not be offended if you are on your phone. Most of us are during my preaching. You're all on the Bible app, right? None of you are on Facebook or anything like that, I'm sure. So go to the Planning Center app, the Church Center app, or our website and events, register. If you need help with that, stop down at Connection Point before you go today, right? Do not leave this building without registering your kids for VBS. Someone will be down at Connection Point that can help you. And if you want to help with decor, right, decorations, with a theme like monumental, I'm guessing we're going big. And we're going to need quite a few hands to help with that. There are lots of different time slots throughout the week that you can help come and, help. Some of you are going to put the crafts together. Some of you are going to help put them on the walls, all that kind of stuff. Check in down by the child's area. There's a sign-up sheet. You can sign up for a time slot to come and help with decorations. We would really love your support with that, okay? So make sure you just kind of check that out before you go. Okay, we got a Bible or a phone or whatever you use. What book are we in? The book of Acts. That's correct. The book of Acts, chapter 16. If you're just now joining us online or in person, we've been in this series called Summer Road Trip, where we are just kind of following along the journey with the Apostle Paul as he goes through what would have been the known world in the first century. And we'll look at a map here in a second. And just kind of, he's sharing the gospel, he's planting churches. We're just kind of following along with him. And so if you've missed any of these weeks, hop on YouTube, hop on our website. You can read, you can catch up with us really quickly. So this is actually part 2 of Acts chapter 16. We did verses 1 through 15 last week. And we're still in the same location. So let's put the map back up there. We are still in the city of Philippi. Right, so that's circled in red up there to the north. We've now gone way west from the first journey. This is Paul's second trip, right? Remember, we had a little pit stop at Jerusalem and Antioch, and then they went back out for a second round. Most of the towns that he stopped in until now were like smaller, more rural communities, right? Like the Almsvilles of the world, the Sios and the Lions. Not Staten, that's big city, right? That's kind of where Paul's been hanging out. Now we're in Philippi. Philippi is a change in strategy. This is a cultural and economic hub of the Roman Empire. It was actually even called Little Rome because of just, its influence in the empire and how many soldiers lived there still. It lies along what was known as it's called the Via Egnatia. It was this trade route. If you kind of look at where Philippi's at, it is a trade route that connected what we know as Europe with Asia. And it was kind of right along there. So very important cultural city and cultural hub. And it's one of the most well-preserved sites of Greece today. Like, I've never had the opportunity to go to Greece, but if you'd go there today, you'd be able to see lots of stuff that the archaeologists have been able to find from the Bible times. So I've got a couple pictures. You're lucky you came to second service, because first service, I forgot to have these in there. So some of you are here because you're like, I wanted to see the pictures. So this first picture, this is an ancient amphitheater that they've uncovered in Philippi, and it's kind of looking down on it. This is where they would gather for like large civic celebrations or entertainment, sports, that kind of stuff would take place there. And you can see how this is kind of hard to tell from this view, but it would seat, lots and lots and lots of people. The second picture is the ruins of called a basilica, which is essentially a big church. And this was likely built several, years after Paul but it gives you a sense of how Christianity must have taken hold there. Right? Because when Paul shows up, there's no basilicas, obviously. There's no Christian churches because he's the first one to show up and bring this message of the gospel. But that shows us that people, it must have caught on, right? So much so that they had to build this big stone church later. And then this last picture is a piece of what the Romans would call the Forum. I don't know if you could kind of tell there were these stone walls that would separate, almost kind of like stalls, and there were hundreds of these in the city, in the middle of town. The Forum, like, the closest thing I can think of today would be a flea market. You know what a flea market is? That always creeped me out, the term flea market. Like, why do we shop for flea? It's weird. Or bazaar, that's another weird term. Like, why would I want to go to the bazaar flea market, right? But that's kind of what the Forum was. It's in the middle of the city, a big square, and it's a marketplace, not just of goods, but of ideas. People kind of spreading their thoughts and philosophy and debating, but also commercial exchanges happening and government buildings, and it's kind of the city center of Philippi. And I show you this because that's where today's story takes place. It takes place in what they would have called the Forum or the marketplace. Now, they're not actually trying to stop there. They're trying to go through that on their way to a place of prayer. If you were with us last week, that's where they met Lydia and these other women who were praying. They're trying to go back there, but they never make it because something interrupts them. Something distracts them, okay? So Acts chapter 16, verse 16, we're going to work our way all the way through this passage together. It says, once when they were going to the place of prayer, we were met by a female slave who had a spirit by which she predicted the future. She earned a great deal of money for her owners by fortune telling. She followed Paul and the rest of us, shouting, "These men are servants of the Most High God, who are telling you the way to be saved." She kept this up for many days. Finally, Paul became so annoyed, he turned around and said to the spirit, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you, come out of her." At that moment, the spirit left her. So they're making their way back to the place of prayer, to the outskirts of the city. They're going through the marketplace. And this girl starts following them and shouting. Now, it says she's been doing this for a couple days. She's been following Paul and these guys around, just kind of shouting, "These guys are from God. And they're here to save your souls. They're here to tell you about salvation," which is correct. She's right. And it's interesting because it says she's not doing that because of, she's just that smart, but she actually is possessed. She has been overtaken by a spirit that has given her this knowledge, which is kind of weird, right? Why would a spirit, we're assuming not a very good one, be allowing her to know that or say that? But actually, you see this in Jesus' ministry a lot, don't we? Jesus would show up to a town, and often it would be a demon-possessed person who would be the first one to acknowledge who Jesus is and what he's there to do. And Jesus would then have to deal with that or shut the demon up or whatever it was. And so she's telling the truth, but Paul gets annoyed with her. When I read that, I wish it didn't say that. And Paul, with such great compassion, it doesn't. It says, finally, Paul became so annoyed. You got to imagine this, though, right? You're kind of trying to keep a low profile, and you're just telling people about Jesus and whatever, and there's someone with a bullhorn walking around. Hey, guess what these guys are doing? Right? Just following you around day after day, blowing your cover, making your life pretty miserable because they're causing a scene, right? Everybody would be like, what? What's she talking about? I mean, just really kind of outing their identity and their mission. And so I think that's part of it. But at some point, I just can't help but think that at some point, Paul had to feel for her as well, right? Because she's enslaved, not just by a spirit or a demon. She's enslaved by owners, plural. Did you catch that? There isn't just one shareholder. There's multiple, we'll just presume, men who are shareholders of this girl's life. She, in a very real sense, is a victim of trafficking, right? Not sexual trafficking, spiritual trafficking. They are using her and her poor state to make money off of her. And so we talked about last week this reality that despite maybe the narrative that we hear right now in our culture, the reality is everywhere Christianity spread, the status of women has been elevated. And you see that in the first century, but you still see that even today, particularly in Africa and Muslim countries and Asia, like in India, for example. It was the spread of Christianity that many people contribute to the laws being changed in India, where widows no longer have to throw themselves on the burn pile of their husband. Like they don't need to do that anymore. Most people would say that was because of the influence of Christianity in India. So this is, in a very real way, women are elevated when Christ comes in the picture. And so he's like, man, I can't let you be taken advantage of. I can't let you stay possessed by this spirit. And he casts this demon out of her. It's pretty cool, right? I think it's pretty awesome. I'd be like clapping, like, yeah, Paul, way to go. Who would not love that? Verse 19, ready? Verse 19, here's who. When her owners, plural, realized that their hope of making money was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace to face the authorities. They brought them before the magistrates and said, "These men are Jews and are throwing our city into an uproar by advocating customs unlawful for us Romans to accept or practice." Is that true? Kind of. It's kind of true. There's always some truth in the lie. In general, you should know, in the first century, the official Roman stance towards other religions was tolerance. For the most part. Not always, right? But for the most part, Romans kind of had this live and let live attitude towards other belief. You can worship and believe whatever you want. You can sing the songs, whatever you want to do, as long as you didn't threaten the stability and security of the empire. In fact, even if you read kind of the trial, I'll put that in scare quotes, but the trial of Jesus and a lot of the conversation happening there, the Romans were very much like, this isn't really our problem. You Jews kind of deal with it, because they didn't really see an issue with what he was teaching. It wasn't until they realized, oh my gosh, this is causing problems for our entire political system, that they wanted to get involved. See, people will tolerate you until you threaten their idols, until you start poking around at the things they hold the most dear. Now, when I talk about idols, I'm not talking about little statues, right? A lot of us, when we read the Bible and it talks about idols, we feel really good because we're like, well, I don't have any little, Buddhas hanging out in my house, so I must be okay. That's not what I'm talking about. You know you have an idol when it's the object of most of your worry. When it's the thing that you just can't let go of in your mind, and you stress about it, and you worry about it. It's what keeps you up at night. Another test, if you go, well, I don't know, Pastor, if there's any idols in my life. Another test would be something you're willing to hurt others to protect. If you're honest and you say, I'd lash out about that one. I would go to war for that. That thing is potentially an idol. And for as long as there's been life, money has been a big one. Money, financial well-being, financial security, progress. It's a good thing that we don't struggle with that. I mean, it's just like Paul's people struggle. You and I, we don't really have that idol anymore, right? It's true though, right? Most people will let's agree to disagree. I'll be tolerant, you do you, it's okay, until it affects their pockets. Then the gloves come off. Then you see what you're really dealing with. Because money for a lot of us is a huge idol. We're willing to kill for it. We're willing to hurt other people for it. We're willing to do things that help us even if it hurts other people. It's like, well, I get mine. So that's part of the issue here. Their money is at stake. There's something else, though, behind the scenes fueling this. Notice they only grab Paul and Silas. Did you notice that? That's peculiar because there's 4 guys, right? There's Timothy, who they picked up last chapter, and there's Luke, the author of the book of Acts. He's using we language, so we're assuming that Luke is there in the middle of this. But they only arrest Paul and Silas. Why is that? Well, Luke is a Gentile. He's not a Jew. And Timothy is only half Jewish, right? His mom was Jewish. His dad was Greek. And so I'm guessing Timmy looks a whole lot more like daddy than mommy. There's a racial undertone to this chapter. There's a reason they only grab Paul and Silas, who clearly stand out in the town, who, by the way, doesn't apparently have enough Jewish men to have a synagogue. We learned that last week. That's why they go to the place of prayer. There's no synagogue. Jewish law was you had to have 10 Jewish men at least to start your own synagogue. So Paul and Silas stand out, is what I'm getting at. They look different. They are clearly not like everyone else. And so they grab them and they say, these men are Jews. That's the first charge. These men are Jews. They're foreigners. They're not like us. But that's not in itself enough to jail somebody. Right? Again, Rome's a pretty tolerant society. And they can't say, well, these guys, they had a spirit that cast out our spirit. Greco-Roman world had tons of gods. They would have just said, well, you should have picked the other spirit to back. I don't know what to tell you. You just lost. Maybe you should change religions and follow that one because theirs is clearly more powerful than yours. Like in Greco-Roman society, that would have not have been something they would have cared about. But if they could convince the magistrates, the leaders of the city, that these men, these foreigners, are undermining the social order, then they have a case. So that is the route they try to go. They say these Jews are throwing our city into an uproar. Right? I don't know what Bible translation you're using. If you click around and go to some other ones, sometimes it's translated as these Jews are stirring up trouble. They're just making a mess of things. Everywhere they go, they're just stirring up trouble. (1965), March 7th, a man by the name of John Lewis and 600 other protesters got together to march from Selma, Alabama to Atlanta, Georgia. They were doing it to protest recent police brutality in the area, as well as what they saw as voting intimidation against black Americans. And so they line up on this bridge outside of Alabama and Selma. They attempt to cross this bridge, and they're ordered to disperse. This big crowd of sheriff deputies, as well as lots of other white locals who showed up that morning to the sheriff deputy's office, were deputized literally hours before to be police. They kind of show up as kind of a counter protest. They stop them from marching and order them to disperse. When Lewis and the others refuse, the gloves came off. Right? They were severely beaten. They were tear gassed, trampled. Lewis himself suffered a skull fracture. He was one of 17 protesters that ended up in the hospital. Dozens of others were injured. And what became known as Bloody Sunday. That was the name that was given to that moment. And at that point, television had really started taking off, right? In the 60s, everybody could watch what happened. They started replaying the live feed of what's happening, and further protests start to erupt around the country. And 2 weeks later, they returned. Martin Luther King Jr. this time leads the march from Selma to Atlanta with 25,000 other people. And this time, rather than being stopped, they're actually protected by the U.S. military and FBI to get safe passage. A couple months later, after Selma, how many of you watched the movie Selma, by the way? Have any of you watched that? If you haven't watched that, that would be a good movie to watch this week. A couple months later, Congress and President Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And John Lewis, you might even know that name, he went on to serve 17 terms in Congress, and he died just 2 years ago, 2020, which is when I kind of first started hearing about this story. Now, I don't tell you that because I endorse all of Lewis's political views. We probably disagree on lots of different politics. But I'm inspired by something Lewis said that day, right, on the bridge in Selma, Alabama. And he talked about how he grew up as a young black boy in the deep South, and his parents always told him, now, John, you need to stay out of trouble. And by that, they didn't mean follow the rules. They meant follow the unspoken rules, right? Keep your head down. Don't make a scene. Don't be too loud. Don't do anything that would cause someone to, don't rock the boat. But Lewis says as he grew up, he realized that there were moments in life that required him to get into what he called good and necessary trouble. Right? There's times when you got to get into good trouble. That was his phrase. And when I read Acts 16, that's what I see happening. Right? Because Paul and Silas, they didn't go to Philippi looking for a fight. They didn't show up with a preconceived idea of how it was going to go down, and we're going to do this, and then they're going to get mad, and so we're going to do this. They didn't wake up that morning hoping to cause a scene and stir the pot or anything like that. But they encounter this trafficked girl, and they do what they think is right, and they just do what the next thing that they believe they need to do on their mission for Jesus, and it gets them in trouble. Right? It gets them punished. So reading this story and thinking about John Lewis, I think here's the question for all of us to maybe wrestle with this morning or this week. When is the last time following Jesus got you into trouble? When is the last time following Jesus got me into trouble? Not because you were looking for it, not because you were intentionally trying to start a culture war or intentionally, stir the pot or even, kind of platform yourself. Sometimes I see Christians today getting in trouble, and it's really clear to me that they're just actually trying to make a name for themselves a little bit. They're trying to build their own platform, and because that's kind of how you get ahead these days. Not any of that stuff. But just because of your love for Christ and just because of your dedication and obedience to Him, which should shape how you live, right? And should shape how you think. You did something or you lived in such a way that caused an uproar. It caused other people to say, oh, whoa, I don't know about that. I disagree with you. If it's been a while, I don't think you're going to need to wait very much longer. Right? I think more and more we're going to see this happen. Christians are already what sociologists call a cognitive minority, not an ethnic minority, a cognitive minority, which means that our worldview and our values and our practices are increasingly at odds with the host culture. This is happening rapidly. It feels like it wasn't that long ago this wasn't the case, but really in the last 20, 30, 50 years, this has just accelerated. And there's been this shift, especially in the last decade. There was actually a study that was done that shows that there's been this shift by our wider culture from a posture of tolerance, kind of like the Romans, to a posture of hostility. There was a recent study I read, I think it was done 3 years ago, that said there's a growing number of people in the United States, in our country, that say that Christians aren't just weird, but dangerous. We're dangerous. Someone came up to me after first service and said there was a New York Times op-ed this week that basically said Christians are a threat to democracy. These kinds of charges are becoming more and more normal. And what does that mean for us? What will that look like as we move forward? I'm not excited about that. I don't wake up in the morning and say, Dear Lord, if you could just, make it that I get in jail someday and don't see my family, that would be great. I don't pray for those things. But I think there's going to be some good trouble. And I wonder if we're prepared for it. I wonder if we've got the right heart for it or the courage for it. Right, when is the last time following Jesus got you in trouble? And then what do you do when you get in trouble? What's your response? How will you react, right? Let's look at what they do. Verse 22. It says, the crowd joined in the attack against Paul and Silas, and the magistrates ordered them to be stripped and beaten with rods. After they'd been severely flogged, they were thrown into prison, and the jailer was commanded to guard them carefully. When he received these orders, he put them in the inner cell and fastened their feet in stocks. So they've been stripped, ashamed in front of everybody. No doubt when they stripped Paul, I'm sure they saw the scars from all the other beatings he's already gotten. I'm guessing the crowd thought, yeah, see, he really is a troublemaker. We're not the first ones to have to deal with this guy. Kind of reinforced their negative opinion of Paul. Beaten within an inch of his life, thrown into jail, in the inner cell, right, fully locked down. They put his feet in shackles. And Paul has to be thinking, God, when you sent me the dream to come here, remember that? They were trying to figure out where they were supposed to go, and they were kind of going this way and that way. And a guy from Macedonia, that's the region they're in, he has this dream of this man from Macedonia saying, come here and help us. Paul had to be thinking, in that dream, I didn't notice any prison decor behind the guy. We just, we went where you told us to go, and look where that's got us, God. Like, is this really the plan? Are you still with me? Have I disappointed you? Like, why is my life so miserable if I'm following you? So then Paul and Silas, they do the only thing they know how to do. Right, verse 25. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. Imagine that, being in that cell, listening to these guys who you saw beaten just like you, and they're thrown, and they're singing. They're praying. Like, what a bunch of weirdos, right? Probably like, shut up over there, I'm trying to sleep, But suddenly, there was such a violent earthquake that the foundations of the prison were shaking. At once, all the prison doors flew open, and everyone's chains came loose. Keep singing, just kidding. Like, whatever you're doing, keep it up. The jailer woke up, and when he saw the prison doors open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself because he thought the prisoners had escaped. But Paul shouted, don't harm yourself. We are all here. The jailer called for lights, rushed in, and fell trembling before Paul and Silas. He then brought them out and asked, sirs, what must I do to be saved? See, he knows, right? The jailer knows that if anybody's missing, that he was supposed to watch, the magistrates are going to demand his life for theirs. And it's going to be public, and it's going to be humiliating, not just for him, but for his family. It's an honor-shame culture, right? If he's shamed, his whole family is shamed, and everyone's going to be whispering about his family forever. So he just thinks, you know what? I'll cut to the chase, and I'll just kill myself. But he doesn't have to, because no one escaped. Right, think about that for a second. What kind of miracle is it when everyone's chains fall off and everyone who could run decides not to? They stay put. In fact, some scholars think that they were in the inner cell, Paul and Silas, that maybe these other prisoners by that point had kind of gathered into the middle, and when the jailer shows up and the lights are on, he sees all of the prisoners standing with Paul and Silas. That's crazy, right? And the jailer can't believe it. Like, they didn't, what? And he's heard, right, that these men know something about God and salvation, because that's what the slave girl's been saying, and everyone kind of knows why they're there. So he says, okay, I'm all ears. Can you tell me about this? Tell me about your God. Tell me, how can I be saved? This is not a prison break. This is a prison ministry. I try to put myself in that situation. I'm like, would I run? Would I stay? I got a family that misses me. Paul's seeing the bigger picture, right? So he's like, how do I be saved? Verse 31, they replied, believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your household. Then they spoke the word of the Lord to him and all the others in his house. And at that hour of the night, the jailer took them and washed their wounds. Then immediately he and all his household were baptized. The jailer brought them into his house and set a meal before them. He was filled with joy because he had come to believe in God, he and his whole household. Right? He was watching over them in prison, then they get out, and now he brings them to his own house. That is such a huge deal in the first century. He brings them in, he washes them, and then they wash him in baptism. Right? So he says, how do I be saved? And this is, Paul just says, first step, believe in Jesus. That's it. Like, how much harder do we make it sometimes? Well, you got, 17 classes later, and if you come to church all these times, and you got to read the whole Bible, and, Paul just says, put your trust in Jesus and who he is. Like, here's who he is. Here's what he did. Put your faith in that. That's step one. Step two, be baptized. Right? Be baptized. August 14th, we've talked about this. August 14th at the park. That's what we're going to be doing, right? That Sunday in the park, it's a celebration of the inward work of God in our life. Baptism doesn't save us, right? Believe in Jesus. There's your salvation. Baptism is the outward expression of that Jesus has done that for me. And as you are plunged into the water, the old self, the old creation is gone. And as you raise up the new creation, the new life in Jesus is what you are proclaiming and rising to. So that's happening on August 14th. We've already got a couple people signed up. Last week, came up to me right after service and said, that is me. I want to be baptized. I'm ready to do that. But I know there's several more of you. Maybe you're watching online and you can't make it here in person. I would love to have a conversation with anybody who wants to be baptized on that day. You can sign up on the Church Center app. You click on baptism there. You can just talk with me after service. I can just get you signed up that way too, and we can have a conversation about it. Believe in Jesus. Be baptized. Then verse 35. This is kind of the end of the story. Okay. When it was daylight, the magistrates sent their officers to the jailer with the order, release those men. The jailer told Paul, the magistrates have ordered that you and Silas be released. Now you can leave. Go in peace. Right? It's just so nice of them, right? Paul said to the officers, wait a minute. They beat us publicly without a trial, even though we're Roman citizens. You might want to underline that phrase. We'll come back to that. Even though we're Roman citizens, and threw us into prison, and now they want to get rid of us quietly? Not happening. Let them come themselves and escort us out. The officers reported this to the magistrates, and when they heard that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens, they were alarmed. That's an understatement. They came to appease them and escort them from the prison, requesting them to leave the city. I love that, requesting them, right? So you beat these guys, you throw them into prison, you're like, hey, we're your heroes, you're free to go, even though the chains literally had already fallen off of them. And now it's switched, right? Now they're like, would you please, maybe, if it's okay with you, would you leave our city peacefully, please? Right? The power dynamic has really shifted. Earthquakes will do that, right? Earthquakes that you didn't expect will do that. This is after Paul and Silas came out of the prison, they went to Lydia's house where they met with the brothers and sisters and encouraged them, and then they left. So it's kind of like Paul's like, yeah, we'll leave, but we got some stuff we want to do first. And then when we're good and ready, we'll leave. Paul's a little sassy at this point, right? I kind of like it. He's getting a little lippy here. But, this is a wild story, right? I had my son read it this week because he's, Dad, what are you preaching on? And had him open up to this, and he was like, whoa, earthquake, and chains falling off, and they were singing in prison, and, just incredible stuff. But the part of the story that really gets me is here at the end, because I never noticed this until I started studying it more for this summer. Okay, maybe you've never realized this either. Paul had a get out of jail free card the whole time. Do you understand that? At any point, Paul could have said, hey, I'm a Roman citizen, because he was. He had dual citizenship. He could have said, I'm a Roman citizen, which means he has to be treated legally like a Roman, which means he gets a trial. There has to be witnesses and evidence presented at that trial that actually makes him guilty. He can't just be beaten publicly. That's how they treated non-citizens. That's not how they treated Romans. They treat him like a non-citizen even though he's a citizen. And so the irony of this whole story is that Paul, the original charge was that these men are following unlawful customs, right? The irony is actually the flip. Now the Romans are not following their own laws. And he exposes that when he says, I'm a Roman citizen. But when does he bring it up? After he's released. What? Are you serious? How long would it have taken you after the first blow to go, hey, just kidding, I'm a Roman citizen, stop. He doesn't bring it up when he's being accused of a crime and say, hey, I need a trial. You can't just throw me in prison without a trial, I'm a Roman. He doesn't bring it up when he's being beaten. He doesn't bring it up when he's thrown in prison with the rats. And by the way, I mean, first century prison was even worse than today's prison. They didn't take care of you. They didn't feed you. They didn't do any of that. You were completely reliant on friends or family to visit you and take care of you in prison. He doesn't bring it up at any of those points. Why not? Because for Paul, the ultimate trump card was not his citizenship, it was his calling. That's why he was there. It goes back to what we talked about last week. Personal liberty matters. It's important. I'm grateful for it. Personal liberty mattered to Paul. He even talks about it in many of his letters, especially 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Personal liberty matters to Paul, but the gospel mattered more. So he doesn't bring it up until after everything's happened, because now when he brings it up, he has an even more powerful story to tell of what God did. And he gets a more powerful audience to tell it to. He says, hey, why don't you have the magistrates come here themselves? I kind of want them to see the prison that they thought could hold me. I kind of want to see the rubbles and the chains laying on the ground. And eventually, Paul is going to go to Jerusalem, and we're not going to get all the way there this summer, but if you know the story, he actually eventually appeals all the way to Rome, and he gets a hearing with Rome. He gets in front of powerful people to share his faith. See, Paul saw something that you and I need to wrestle with and understand. Your story isn't just personal, it's purposeful. It's not just your story, it's God's story. And he has a purpose in it. He has a mission for you. If you'll lean into it and allow him to lead you where he wants you to go and do what he asks you to do. Right? God didn't send the earthquake for Paul and Silas. You know that, right? Which, does it bother anybody else? They literally were they had a one-day sentence anyway. The next day, the magistrates apparently were prepared to let them go. It seems like a waste of a perfectly good earthquake. You know, that God would be like, there you go, and now you're out. It's like, yeah, okay, well, you're God, you know. But the earthquake wasn't for them. The earthquake was for the jailer and the jailer's family and the generations after them. And the earthquake was for the other prisoners and the magistrates, that those people would see the power of God. It was for anybody else in Philippi after them who would come to put their faith in Christ because of this story. You don't think this story was told for decades, even generations? Let me tell you about this time, this guy named Paul and this earthquake. And then he shared about Jesus. And now there's a church in Philippi. Let me just ask a couple questions for you to kind of wrestle with. We've already asked them, but I want you to just think through them this week, okay? Question 1, when is the last time following Jesus got you into good trouble? Okay, not because you went looking for it. Kids, don't backtalk your parents and say, I'm just trying to get into good trouble like Pastor Mike told me. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about trouble that is a direct result of you just living out your faith in an unassuming way, you know? Again, Paul and them, like, they didn't wake up that day and go, man, I want to make this whole town flip upside down. They just did the next right thing that they felt God was calling them to do, and it got them in a mess. I would gently suggest that if it's been a while since you've gotten in trouble because of your faith, maybe you ought to examine that faith a little bit. Right? Like, what is your level of obedience? Are you just kind of going with the flow of culture? Are you afraid to make a stand where you need to make a stand? Are you afraid to say the wrong thing that might offend somebody, even if you feel like that's not right? I would examine a little bit, right, where you're at. I would also recommend that you get around some other people that challenge your faith a little bit. As a pastor, I would say this is harder for me than just about anybody. I am a professionally paid Christian. I hang out mostly with Christians and in a church office and in a building. Like, I have to purposely work hard to get around people who don't see the world the way I do and don't have the values that I do. And because that's where the rub happens, right? But that's where we need to be, with grace, with love. Right? Again, you don't wake up going, I'm just going to be a jerk today and see who, jerk for Jesus. Not the goal, but you just living your life causes you to encounter people who see things different than you and causes good trouble. All right, question 2, whose story might change if I was willing to step into the mess? See, a lot of us, we don't want to go there. We don't want to step into that because of the blowback, because we don't want to offend or lose friends or whatever. So we kind of shrink from the moment and we play nice or, yeah, I think that too, whatever. But man, whose life would be different if we said, no, it's going to get messy, but I'm going to step into this. Right? Because think about Paul, think about all the lives that are now intersecting because of the prison moment. Right? Paul would later write a letter to these people. It's called the book of Philippians. If you haven't read that, that would be a great book to read this week. He's writing that to the church in Philippi. That's why it's called the Philippians. Now, when I say he's writing to a church, don't picture like a big building with a steeple and a cross and a kid's wing and lights and don't picture that. Picture Lydia's house. That's likely where they met at the beginning. In fact, that's where they went right after they got out of prison, right? That's where they're gathering. And in this house, imagine this living room where you have a fairly wealthy, independent woman like Lydia, who's the host, sitting next to a formerly demon-possessed, poverty-stricken young girl. And on her right is a Roman prison guard surrounded by inmates he used to watch over. And they are all in that house. That doesn't happen anywhere in the first century except the church. It's the only place, and even today I would say it's the church, this place is the only place in the world where people like that can sit here together and do this. But it doesn't happen if Paul doesn't step into the mess. It doesn't happen if Paul doesn't cast out the possessed girl. It doesn't happen if he plays his citizenship card and doesn't go to prison and do all of the things. Paul got into good trouble, and because of that, lives were changed. So as you go this week and you're thinking about, okay, what should I say? Where should I go? Remember, your story isn't just your story, it's God's story. It isn't just personal, it's purposeful. What purpose does he have for you today? What purpose does he have this week in your jobs, in your schools, in your neighborhoods, in your families? Step into it. Step into it. Let me pray for us. God, I am blown away by Paul's courage and his boldness in the book of Acts. As we've talked about a few times in the series, he wasn't perfect. He didn't get everything right. He was a sinner just like me. but led by you, led by the Holy Spirit, he went and did and said things that just blow me away. And so we ask that you would send that same Spirit to lead us today. This week, would you be with us? Would you lead us into places and into conversations of good trouble, knowing that you'll get the glory, knowing that whatever happens to us, we can trust you, that you're always with us, and that it's worth it, Lord. Our ultimate purpose is to know you, to be known by you, and then to project that love and knowledge to the world. That is our story. That is our calling. We pray that you would lead us and help us to do that well, whatever comes this week. And we pray this in your name. Amen. Thanks again for being here online. Thanks for tuning in with us. Pray a blessing over you as well. If you need help signing up for VBS, stop by Connection Point. You want to talk about baptism, all those things, we're going to be down there. Again, if you want to give, you see it on the screen online or on your way out. We would love for your generosity to pour through our church, right? It's not about pulling them here. It's about sending them through our church into the world and into good places. So have a great week.